Hey guys, back to the Yerf Dog go-kart broken axle fix. And well, after all of that work on the lathe, it turns out a lot of that work, if not all of it, is going to be for naught, because I've got this problem here, which is these are the hubs off of the Yerf Dog axle. And my problem is that I had already said that, well, I'm not going to cut splines on the end of that new axle. So what I've got a problem with is that I was going to bore this out so it's smooth and cut a keyway in it. Well, you can see the problem with this hub. This hub is so thin walled here. By the time I bore this out and cut a keyway in, it's going to be weak. So I'm not liking that at all. So now I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? I could get new hubs, right? Aftermarket ones. But now we're putting more money in that I didn't plan on doing. Then I was looking at my old Kawasaki ATV parts machine that's laying out in the back there, and I thought for a second, hey, maybe I can use that. But then I remembered, problem with that is that's a shaft drive. So it's got two short axles that go into a differential, so that's not going to work. And I think I might have mentioned that or something to Aiden, and Aiden reminded me that off of Facebook here in town locally, like last year sometime or a year and a half ago, somebody put up a rear ATV axle with tires and wheels on it for like cheap money, like $20 or something like that, and we decided to grab that for the tires and the wheels. Well, it turns out we never threw out that axle. So I said to him, take that apart, get me the parts, and let's see if we can't do something with that. So here's one of the hubs off of that axle. All right, so you'll notice the design is already better just by the fact, instead of having just this plus sign, they left all of this metal in here. All right. These are cast. You can tell just by looking at them. I don't know if this is sintered or whatever the heck they call that, but the point is these hubs look a little bit better. More importantly, look at the size of the end here where the splines are in comparison to this one. Significantly larger. It's a beefier axle, which is great. So here we can see the difference. All right. So that's the good news. The bad news is this ATV axle's overall length is not long enough. So I can't just finagle a way to make this axle complete work as a replacement for the other axle. However, what I'm wondering about now is whether or not I can use these ends of this axle and use some couplers, which I already started to make on the lathe, right, to actually weld these on to the ends of the original axle. Because the original axle is pretty hefty in the middle here, right? It's just these ends that kind of are weak. The other problem I was going to have was getting, this size bearing to work. But it occurred to me that if I have this apart, took the bearing out of the other one. See, if we have this apart, as long as I make my couplers that are going to be used to put the two axles together, as long as I make it so that the OD of that coupler is smaller than this hole, I can pass it through the backs of these holders and then assemble the holders with the bearings and everything once the axle's already going through. So that'll become more clear when I'm doing reassembly, because I'm already thinking positively that this is going to work. So the first question I have to answer for myself is, what exactly is the deal here with this bearing, with this shaft? Because I can see splines right here to drive this hub for the, well, not really drive the hub. It's actually, this is the brake disc, okay? So there's no grub screw holding this on that I can see anywhere. So I have no idea why this is staying where it is. Is it pressed onto this? I don't even know whether or not this axle goes all the way through, if this is a solid axle, or whether or not it's actually like some kind of a hub inside here. Okay, this is where the swing arm would have attached on the ATV, would be to this whole thing. So this whole thing right here is supporting the entire axle. So there's got to be bearings inside here. And I got to believe that they were made to be replaced. So there's got to be some way that this can come off of here. So that's interesting. So the more of this axle that I have to play with, the better. So what I want to try and do is get either the whole axle out if it is one piece, or the two pieces that insert into this if this is a hub in one piece. So I got to try and get this apart. I don't know how I'm going to do it. On this side, we get another hub. Okay, Aiden undid these 4 bolts, but all that does is release the sprocket from the hub. But again, the hub is on the shaft, and again, no grub screw or anything indicating exactly what keeps this from A, spinning on this shaft, and B, staying in position this way. Ground this off so that I could fit this whole assembly up through here like this. Alright, I'm gonna have to lower this whole thing down, but I think this is gonna work. Alright, I got enough of these mounts off so I can drop this in from the top easy, and now I should have enough clearance too. Now, I'm going to give this a shot. Let's see if I can push this shaft out of this collar right here. And I am going to be relying on the strength of this sprocket, so if that starts to give, then I'm going to have to support the collar some other way, which probably will mean having to cut away this bracket. But let's try this first. And I don't want to be pushing on the end of the shaft here where it's machined for the cotter pin for the castle nut. So I'm just going to put this socket on here. It's a perfect fit. It'll push on here. It won't damage anything. Oh yeah, no problem. So that's just a press fit apparently. That is weird. Yeah, there we go. Alright, get that out of here. So now I'm thinking maybe I can push this whole shaft with the bearing that's on the other end out of the housing. I don't want to go through the trouble of lowering this down a whole nother peg, the shelf there, the support shelf, so I don't have enough room to get that socket in there, so I'm just going to wing it. Oh yeah, it's coming out easily. Just gonna support the bottom in case it suddenly wants to drop out, which it just did. Alright, got one last bit of work here on the press, and that's to get this collar that had the brake disc on it off. Hopefully that'll press off as easily as the other one did. So here we are back on the bench and looking at the two shafts side by side. It's obvious that this shaft is too short. You know what strikes me is there was no reason why they had to weaken this shaft by machining it the way they did. This thickness here is about the same as the thickness of this heavier shaft from the ATV. Where they ran afoul was turning it down at the end. They step it down from this thickness here down here. They step it 1, and then they step it again here. This is where the bearing rides. Okay, this bearing rides here, and then they step it down again and put the splines on, and then they stepped it down again to where the threaded area is, and this is where it snapped on the other side. So the other interesting thing to me is, being a Yerf dog, I kind of figured this was a Chinese sourced part, so I figured it would be metric, and sure enough, it's a 25 millimeter shaft. At this point right here, it's 25 millimeters in diameter, and they make a 25 millimeter bearing that fits this cage, which is on a website that sells go-kart parts. So that makes total sense. What doesn't make sense to me is that the bearings that are in here right now are 1-inch bearings, because they make this as a 1-inch bearing also. This ID here is 1 inch. So when this is on here, there's actually quite an amount of play in there, and they're relying on these set screws basically to take up the play. The problem with that is it's not going to be, the ID of the bearing is not going to be running concentric to the shaft. Now, is that going to make that much of a difference? I guess not, maybe. Who knows? But that just seems like a hell of a way to do things. The other possibility is that somebody replaced these bearings at some point in this go-kart's life, and instead of ordering 25 millimeter bearings, they ordered 1-inch bearings, or they were able to source 1-inch bearings easier, so they just went with 1 inch. So what I've got to figure out is, what do I want to do about my problem over here? If I end up using these end parts here and splicing them onto my existing shaft, I'm going to be dealing with having to find bearings that will fit this diameter here, or I need to turn this down. I'd rather not turn this down if I don't have to. I'd like to keep it as beefy as possible. So I just checked, and the nominal dimension of this shaft, which I think it's safe to assume this came out of a Japanese go-kart, Japanese ATV or Chinese ATV, and that it's probably metric, and it is. It actually measures just a hair under 27 inches, which is your interference fit. So I need a 27-inch bearing. So ideally, if I could find a bearing that would fit these cages that is 27-inch ID, that would be perfect.